Welcome everybody to this edition of Jay's Retro Toys and Games. It's the first show of the second season. Episode 22 is on its way from Monday, September 5th, 2022. We hope you had a great summer, and we're picking up where we left off. We're in a game right now that's very, very popular. And I mean so popular that it had a very, very long run. In fact, it was invented in 1957 by Albert Lamorisse, a French filmmaker, and it became one of the most popular board games in history, inspiring other popular games such as Axis and Allies and Settlers of Catan. The simple rules, but complex interactions make it appealing to adults as well as children and families. And it's still in production by Hasbro with numerous editions and variants with popular media themes and different rules, including PC software versions, video games, and mobile apps. Who are we talking about, or what are we talking about tonight? Oh, yeah, we're talking about Risk right here on Jay's Retro. Jay's Retro Toys and Games. Alrighty, I welcome you on this Labor Day. Hope you had a great weekend, and we welcome you back to this edition of Season 2 of Jay's Retro Toys and Games. I'm Jason DeCanio, your gracious host, and thank you again for coming back to what is going to be a great second season with more toys and games that we're going to be looking at. And we just gave you a great history, or a little bit of a touch of the history, of the strategy board game of diplomacy, conflict, and conquest for 2 to 6 players. It's Risk, and it's basically played on a board depicting a political map of the world divided into 42 territories, which are grouped into 6 continents. Now, let's look at the history and take it from there. Risk was invented by French film director Albert Lamorisse, and originally released in 1957 as La Conquête du Monde, or The Conquest of the World in France. It was bought by Parker Brothers and released in 1959 with some modifications to the rules as Risk, the Continental Game, then as Risk, the Game of Global Domination. The first new version of Risk was released in 1986 called Castle Risk, and it featured a map depicting 18th century European castles instead of a map of the world, and it was a financial disappointment. In 1993, the rules for Secret Mission Risk, which had been the standard in Europe, were added to the United States edition. After a limited special edition release in 1999 in France called Risk, the edition Napoleon, in commemoration of 200th anniversary of the Napoleonic era, a new edition called Risk 2210 AD was published in 2001 by Hasbro's Avalon Hill division. Now, the game was futuristic themed, featuring moon territories, ocean territories, and commander units, and offered a number of expansions. Then in 2002, Risk versions themed around media franchises such as Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and Transformers were released, sometimes with as many as 6 editions per year. A collector's edition of classic Risk in a bookshelf format wooden box was issued in 2005 as part of the Parker Brothers Vintage Game Series, distributed through Target stores. Then in 2008, Winning Moves, a Hasbro licensee, introduced 1959 Risk, a reproduction of the original Parker Brothers version with original artwork, wooden playing pieces, and rules. And many themed versions are currently being published, and new themes continue to be introduced. In the first editions, the playing pieces were wooden cubes, one set each of black, blue, green, pink, red, and yellow, representing one troop each and a few rounded triangular prisms representing 10 troops each. But in later versions of the game, these pieces were molded of plastic to reduce costs. In the 80s, these were changed to pieces shaped into the Roman numerals I, or 3. They were 1, 3, 5, and 10. The 1993 edition introduced plastic infantry tokens representing a single unit, cavalry representing 5 units, and artillery representing 10. The 40th anniversary collector's edition contained the same troop pieces but made of metal rather than plastic. And then in the 2005 bookcase edition, playing pieces are once again wooden cubes. Now, equipment includes a large tabletop board depicting a political map of the world divided into 42 territories, which are grouped into 6 continents by color. Now, in addition to shared boundaries between territories, which define routes of attack and defense, numerous special transoceanic or trans-sea routes are also marked. For example, the route between North Africa and Brazil. The oceans and seas are not part of the playing field. Now, each Risk game comes with a number of sets, either 5 or 6 of different color tokens denoting troops. A few different or larger tokens represent multiple, usually 5 or 10 troops. These token types are purely a convention for ease of representing a specific army size. And if a player runs out of an army pieces during the game, pieces of another color or other symbolic tokens, coin pieces from other games, etc., may be substituted to help keep track of armies. Also included is a deck of Risk cards, comprising 42 territory cards, 2 wild cards, and 12 or 28 mission cards. The territory cards correspond to the 42 territories on the playing board, and each of the territory cards also depicts a symbol of an infantry, cavalry, or artillery piece. One of these cards is awarded to a player at the end of each turn if the player has successfully conquered at least one territory during that turn. No more than 1 card may be awarded per turn. Now, if a player collects either 3 cards with the same symbol, or 1 of each, or 2 different and a wild card, they may be traded in for reinforcements at the beginning of a player's turn. These cards can also be used for game setup. The 2 wild cards depict infantry, cavalry, and artillery pieces. And because these cards have all 3 symbols, they can match with any 2 other cards to form a set. The mission cards, each specifying some secret mission, something less than Conquer the World, are used in the secret mission Risk rule variant. Standard equipment also includes 5 or 6 dice in 2 colors, 3 red dice for the attacker, and 2 or 3 white or blue dice for the defender. There is also a golden cavalry piece used to mark the progressive turn-in value of matched sets of territory cards. Now, the following, and you'd have to see it, and of course we'll give you the link to this. The following is a typical layout of the Risk game board with a table of the corresponding continent and territory names. Each territory on the typical Risk game board represents a real-life geographical or political region, and as such, the territory borders are drawn to resemble the geography of those regions. This provides an interior space on which to place the army units, adds an element of realism to the game, and also adds complexity. Most of the territories represent a combination of countries or states. Some that have names of single countries or states, such as Argentina, do not represent the boundaries of the real-life entity. Antarctica, the Caribbean, New Zealand, and the Philippines are not represented. And the number in the parentheses represents the number of additional armies granted during the reinforcement stage of a player's turn, who controls all of the territories in that continent. Some versions of the board use alternative names for some territories, and these names are in parentheses, and not all variations occur concurrently. Now, setup consists of determining order of play, issuing armies to players, and allocating the territories on the board among players, who place 1 or more armies on each one they own. Now, at the beginning of a player's turn, they receive reinforcement armies proportional to the number of territories held. Bonus armies for holding whole continents, and additional armies for turning in match sets of territory cards obtained by conquering new territories. The player may then attack, move their armies, or pass. And on a player's turn, after they have placed their reinforcements, they may choose to attack territories adjacent to theirs, which are occupied by enemy armies. A territory is adjacent if it is connected visibly by land or by a sea lane. Now, attacks are decided by dice rolls, with the attacker or defender losing a specified number of armies per roll. And when attacking, a battle may continue until the attacker decides to stop attacking. The attacker has no more armies with which to attack, or the defender has lost their last army at the defending territory, at which point the attacker takes over the territory by moving armies onto it and draws a territory card for that turn. At the end of the player's turn, they may move armies from one of their territories to another connected territory. The player is eliminated from the game when they have lost their last territory, and the player that defeated them receives the defeated player's territory cards, if any. The victor is the last player remaining when all other players have been eliminated. And of course, there are special rules for two-player games. The territories are divided between the two players and a neutral army during setup. In play, the neutral army only plays defense when attacked, never attacks or moves armies, and doesn't have a turn like an active player. If the neutral army is eliminated, the game continues under normal rules. Now, some editions have rules variants regarding how armies or territories are allocated during setup, or how armies may be moved at the end of a turn. And there are also variations in the tokens representing armies that don't affect play. European editions assign each player a secret mission, and the game goes until one player completes their mission rather than conquers the world. Now, different editions have differing numbers of such missions. The Italian edition uses a different number of dice in battle. Themed variants have different map configurations and substantially different rules. The rules of some editions describe a variant called capital risk, where each player has a capital in one of the initially occupied territories. The player to capture all capitals wins. Any armies or territories that belong to the losing nation are turned over to the victor. Capital risk often leads to much shorter games, and other rules variants for risk experts are also listed. Gaming clubs may also have house rules or competition adjusted rules. So, of course, the basic strategy, the official rulebook recommends 3 basic strategy points for play under the standard rules. Players should control entire continents to get the bonus reinforcement armies. Players should watch their borders for buildups of armies that could imply an upcoming attack. And players should build up armies of their own borders for better defense. Holding continents is the most common way to increase reinforcements. Players often attempt to gain control of Australia early in the game, since Australia is the only continent that can be successfully defended by heavily fortifying one country, either Siam or Indonesia. Now, generally, continents with fewer access routes are easier to defend, as they possess fewer territories that can be attacked by other players. South America has 2 access points. North America and Africa each have 3. Europe has 4, and Asia has 5. Generally, it is thought advisable to hold risk cards until they can be turned in for maximum reinforcements. This is especially true earlier on in gameplay, because extra armies make a greater difference in the beginning of the game. Eliminating a weak player who holds a large number of risk cards is also a good strategy. And since players who eliminate their opponents get possession of their opponent's risk cards, in this case, trading in risk cards earlier may help acquire the necessary troops. If the conquering player has 6 or more risk cards after taking the cards of another player, the cards must be immediately returned in for reinforcements until the player has fewer than 5 cards, and then may continue attacking. Turtling. Well, it's a defensive strategy where a player who feels vulnerable tries to become too expensive to be removed while remaining a threat to harass other players. The objective of this strategy is to avoid early defeat. A player using this strategy might remain in the game all the way to later stages and then mount an attack on the weakest player and start a chain elimination to remove one player after another to win the game. The player who uses this strategy is called a turtle. And the term was popularized in real-time strategy games where a player creates a defensive perimeter or a turtle shell around the base of operations. Solutions to counteract this strategy using cooperation have been proposed. And the rules of risk neither endorse nor prohibit alliances or truces. Thus, players often form unofficial treaties for various reasons, such as safeguarding themselves from attacks on one border while they concentrate their forces elsewhere, or eliminating a player who has grown too strong. And because these agreements are not enforceable by the rules, these agreements are often broken. Alliance making or breaking can be one of the most important elements of the game, and it adds human interaction to a decidedly probabilistic game. Some players allow trading of risk cards, but only during their turn, and this optional rule can make alliances more powerful. Capturing a territory depends on the number of attacking and defending armies and the associated probabilities. In a battle to completion, a player who has more armies, even just one more, has a significant advantage whether on attack or defense. The number of attacking armies does not include the minimum one army that must be left behind in the territory. Defenders always win ties when dice are rolled, and this gives the defending player the advantage in one-on-one fights. But the attacker's ability to use more dice offsets this advantage. It is always advantageous to roll the maximum number of dice unless an attacker wishes to avoid moving men into a dead-end territory, in which case they may choose to roll fewer than 3. Thus, when rolling 3 dice against 2, 3 against 1, or 2 against 1, the attacker has a slight advantage. Otherwise, the defender has an advantage. And there are online tools available to compute the outcome of whole campaigns. Example, the attacking of several territories in a row. Rischio, or Rizzichio, is a variant of the game released in Italy, in which the defender is allowed to roll up to 3 dice to defend. This variation dramatically shifts the balance of power towards the defense. Of course, there were awards and commendations. Risk was introduced into Games Magazine's Hall of Fame in 1984, was inducted into the Academy of Adventure Gaming Arts and Design Hall of Fame in 1995, and the National Toy Hall of Fame in 2021. Now, in addition to the original version of 1959 and a 40th anniversary edition with metal pieces, a number of official variants of Risk have been released over the years. In recent years, Hasbro has predominantly based its Risk variants on popular films. In chronological order, the variations of Risk that have been released are Castle Risk, the 40th Anniversary Collector's Edition, the Edition Napoleon, 2210 AD, Lord of the Rings. They had a Trilogy Edition, they had a Gandor and Mordor expansion set, Godstorm, Star Wars Clones War Edition, the original Trilogy Edition of Star Wars, Risk Jr., Narnia, the Transformers Edition. And the list goes on, just like Monopoly. Had so many versions of all of these editions of the original Risk. And the list goes on. And many of the official versions of Risk listed above have their own rules, which may differ slightly or even significantly from the original game of Risk. And there's a legacy that there are 5 factions, each with different pieces and rules. And this game is the actual originator of the term legacy game, which means that the rules and the mechanics are added and changed. Previous games permanently affect all future games, and cards are permanently modified and destroyed. There's variants on regional or country maps. There's also variants from existing works of science fiction or fantasy. There's a lot of clones out there that copy this game. There was a video game, and there was a television series adaptation on January 11th of 2021. It was reported that a television series adaptation of the game is in development from House of Cards creator Bo Willimon. You also can see Diplomacy, which is a similarly themed board game. The list of war games, Global War, which was an Apple II clone game back in 1979. And there you have it, folks. Risk in all of its variants, from maps to playing pieces to rules, regulations, a great history that goes back to 1957. What a game Risk is. And we looked at it here tonight on the first show of the new season, Season 2 of Jay's Retro Toys and Games. Next time on the program, Wednesday, we're going to be looking at another game, because remember, we do 2 games, then we do 2 toys. 2 games, 2 toys. And I say we should look at Parcheesi. Why? Because it's an interesting game, but very doesn't have much on history. All right, so we got to look at something that might have, let's see, backgammon? Oh, let's see, backgammon might be a good one that has some, oh yeah, very much. Good. We'll look at backgammon on Wednesday's edition of episode 23 of Jay's Roys and Games? No, Jay's Toys and Games. Thank you for joining me here on the program tonight. I hope you had a great Labor Day weekend. We will see you on Wednesday. And remember, folks, be honest, be real, and keep it simple, stupid. Kiss. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Don't forget to subscribe to the Advertising Network for great more content like this one.